Momus is a strange creature, really an example of self-invention. He decided to become Momus in his 24th year. Before that he'd been a student, a native of Edinburgh, a city in Scotland. I think we find a continuous process of what you might call perversification in Momus, that he starts out really as a melancholy poet of a kind of lyrical kind with existential themes. And then he decides to marginalize himself and interests himself in perverse phenomena of all kinds. And this really is I suppose you could see this as a response to social alienation. He certainly has problems with gender roles, really all kinds of adaptation to the social norm. And I think you can see a process of socialization happening over the 8 years or so of his career. Really, he began as someone who was interested in other art forms, particularly literature, and who had a particularly inappropriate view of pop music as a branch of literature. And I think over his albums, his output from year to year, you notice a kind of socialization to the norms of pop music. So while he was becoming more alienated in his subject matter and delving ever deeper into perversity, he was actually discovering the traditional expressive forms of pop music. So he became more interested in what you might call the phenomenon of Jerry Lee Lewis dancing on the piano than in becoming a sort of Dostoevsky of pop music. I think he has problems with this notion of a true style. He doesn't believe in this idea that people are born with a style. He sees style as a very arbitrary cultural construct. So he's always been happy to, in a self-consciously postmodern way, he might say, he's been happy to delve in a kind of Pandora's box of styles and use whatever suits him. It's really, the work of Momus is all about the adoption of personas, the use of masks, what's known in English as devil's advocacy, where one takes perhaps an unpopular position and dramatizes it in order to stimulate a public debate on the subject rather than making a firm moral stance on something. The narrator wishes in some ways to be a very seductive character and to draw the listener into the song, but at the same time it's made very clear in every Momus song that you should never trust the narrator, and in the way that stands as a kind of warning never to trust any figure of authority. If you don't trust the medium of pop music, if you don't trust the person who's singing you the song, then you learn to develop critical powers and to question everything. Momus, being the god of mockery and criticism, obviously has to endorse the role of criticism in general. So I think if there is a seduction involved, it's always tempered by that warning. So the seduction is often launched from a dangerous angle, a dangerous area, somewhere which is taboo perhaps. There are scenes described of seduction of pupils by teachers, or seduction of patients by doctors, always situations in which there ought to be a bond of trust, but in fact in the song this bond is under question and is broken down. God and sex, perhaps, just as in the work of Prince, God and sex are quite closely connected in Momus, and you could say that inverting the biblical idea that we are created in God's image, that Momus takes a kind of Nietzschean view that God is created in our own image. Each person makes a personal God, which is a kind of projection of their own character. And so we see in a song like The Angels of Juarez this idea that God might be a benign pervert, a kind of a sexual creature. After all, if we're made in God's image, or He's made in our image, then we're both sexual creatures. And we would have to be the sort of unrequited or unrequiting sexual object of God, that we're asked all the time to love God. And some of us do and some of us don't. And perhaps God is, just as a lover, is more in the power of the loved object who doesn't return his love, and perhaps becomes obsessive in that case. So God becomes obsessed with sinners and with people who escape his edicts. We live in a post-moral age. I mean, there are Momus songs which say this, but I think they say this despite Momus's desire that people should take moral issues more seriously. And I think the strange thing about the reception of Momus's work is that he's been generally seen as an immoral character, a provocateur whose provocations exist just to give him perverse satisfaction and to elevate his status as a kind of devil figure in the pop world. And this is very far from the truth. Really, he's actually trying to open these questions in order for moral issues to be on the agenda. And I think it's quite an interesting sign of an age that doesn't want to deal with moral questions, that it demonizes figures who try to raise them. Technology begins with the panpipes. Technology begins even with language. That as soon as you invent language, you invent a system of metaphor in which nothing is itself anymore. It is something with a name. It is something which has a sign attached to it quite arbitrarily. And so Momus has problems with people who are suspicious of computers because somehow they represent a flight from some kind of supposed reality, because computers in fact just give us a new relationship of signs, really, to whatever is reality, which is as much in our heads as outside us. Music, I mean, if you say Momus began with acoustic guitars or whatever, I mean, still what he was doing was using tape recorders, and I think Momus has always found that there was an evil genius in technology, a kind of, I suppose it's basically the amoral thing which he's always trying to look at. And Momus is always seen as somehow embodying an almost dangerous lack of moral restriction. And the music industry certainly has a strange position in culture in that it's, although it actually operates as a very successful industry and should be awarded with all sorts of prizes from the government and things. In Britain, anyway, it's seen very much as a parasite. And although it gets huge import duties and everything, and is very successful as an export. I mean, it's basically penalised, and there's a debate at the moment about whether CDs should be reduced in price and all the rest of it. So the music industry is seen traditionally as this rather evil underground phenomenon, and I think Momus was certainly interested in that, the problematic position that music has in culture. So rather than becoming a writer, which perhaps he felt he should have done at one point, he thought he would go into this area which was still open, which was still confused, and which people still had problems accepting. And I think the notion of a battle which has not yet been won is very important for Momus. When pop music is not just concerned with ambition, personal ambition, or aggressive normality, which is often its only function, it can be concerned with questioning desire. He's trying to make a comment with the tools of pop music about pop music and about the end of pop music. But he's doing it in quite an old-fashioned way, really. Just as say Baudrillard or say Jacques Derrida are talking about the impossibility of meaning in very meaningful ways, and using the vocabulary which they're at the same time proclaiming is now defunct. So I think Momus is talking about, especially talking about a kind of humanistic and literary culture inside pop music, which, and he's in a way proclaiming in songs like Morality is Vanity, he's proclaiming the end of that humanistic culture, but paradoxically extending it as he does so. It's increasingly difficult to maintain an independent critical position on a lot of things, because on the one hand the traditional opposition to the mainstream banality or the inertia which characterizes the sort of the zeitgeist most of the time, has disappeared. In other words, things like communism, Marxism, Eurocommunism particularly, as a kind of oppositional force is no longer there. And I think Momus's concern with sexuality was in large extent a flight from a traditional Marxist position or post-Marxist position or New Left Frankfurt School position of social analysis. And he thought, well, if this disappears, the one thing which can never disappear and which can always be a source of a critical fissure, you could call it, a kind of cleft in the armour of the doxa, of what Barthes called the doxa, or common sense, was sexuality. And Baudrillard actually says quite interestingly that things become their opposite when there is too much attention paid to them, or when they become fetishized, or when they're opened up, having been hidden. And sexuality is one of these things which has exploded itself by being too open, by being too uncovered, by being in fact promulgated everywhere in advertising and commercial media. And so even sexuality might now have been exploded as a platform from which to judge and criticize. And I think Momus may find himself in future having to find another subject, perhaps money. Perhaps money is the only sacred subject left.
Oh.